Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely hidden piece of history. We're talking about the spectacular rise and the honestly staggering fall of an absolute political titan. Now, if you think you've got the story of African independence all figured out, well, get ready, because this narrative is going to completely flip your perspective. We're exploring the life of Oscar Kambona. He's a man whose massive impact on his country has just mysteriously faded from the spotlight.
I mean, what if I told you that one of the most powerful men in Tanzania's entire history is barely talked about today? Seriously, we're talking about a leader who was once considered the second most influential figure in the whole country. He was sitting right alongside Julius Nyerere. So how does someone that powerful, someone who literally helped lead the struggle for his country's independence, how does he just practically vanish from modern conversation? Well, that's exactly the mystery we're unpacking today.
So to understand the man, we've got to look at where he started. Oscar Kambona was born back in 1928 in southern Tanganyika, right down by Lake Nyasa. He was actually the son of one of the country's very first African Anglican priests, and right from the get-go he showed exceptional intelligence. But crucially, it was while he was attending school in Tabora that he crossed paths with so many of the folks who would become the future leaders of Tanzania. He actually started out as a teacher, but the growing movement against British colonial rule, that pulled him in fast.
And his life from there on out, it's basically a rapid, turbulent roller coaster. So born in 1928, right? Well, by 1955, he shoots up to the absolute highest levels of political organization. He helps achieve national independence in 1961, but then, just 6 years later, he's forced into a secret exile, and that leaves this massive, decades-long gap until he eventually returns in 1992. I mean, the sheer speed at which he gains and then totally loses power, it's just breathtaking.
Okay, so the real turning point in his early career happens in 1955. That's when Kambona becomes the Secretary General of the Tanganyika African National Union, or TANU for short. Now, TANU was the political movement explicitly designed to mobilize the masses against British colonial rule. And Kambona, he didn't just sit in an office and hold a fancy title. No way. He traveled across the entire country, constantly drumming up support. He was famous for delivering these incredibly powerful, magnetic speeches. His raw organizational skills really helped TANU grow at an astonishing rate, bringing thousands and thousands of new members into the anti-colonial cause.
Now, a huge part of this success came down to a really powerful dynamic between two men. On one hand, you had Julius Nyerere, who was widely considered the movement's chief thinker and philosopher. But on the other hand, you had Oscar Kambona, the incredibly effective organizer who actually made those ideas a reality on the ground. It was like a giant puzzle coming together. Kambona's logistical brilliance just perfectly complemented Nyerere's overarching vision. For a long time, they were the ultimate political duo, with a friendship that seemed totally unbreakable.
And that unbreakable partnership absolutely culminated in 1961. December 9th, 1961 to be exact. Together, Nyerere and Kambona successfully led Tanganyika to independence. It was a massive, historic triumph. Really, it was the culmination of years of relentless organizing, speaking, and mobilizing. And at this moment, picture this. They are standing at the absolute peak of a newly independent nation, looking out at a future that they are literally going to build together. Following independence, Kambona's rise was basically meteoric. He wasn't just handed some minor background role. No, he was given the keys to the country's security and its international standing. We're talking Minister of Home Affairs, Minister of Defense, and then in 1963, he becomes the very first Minister of Foreign Affairs. He literally held the military, domestic security, and foreign relations all in his own hands. At this point, he was undeniably viewed as the natural, obvious successor to Nyerere.
But his influence wasn't just political. This is wild. It was deeply cultural, too. Kambona was young, he was highly charismatic, and just wildly popular. He was such a prominent figure that young Tanzanians actually started copying his haircut. Yeah, they famously dubbed it the Kambona style. It just goes to show he wasn't just a politician, he was a true cultural icon of a newly optimistic era.
Now, his political capability was put to the absolute ultimate test in 1964. During that year, a severe army mutiny genuinely threatened to destabilize the entire young government. But Kambona stepped up and played an absolutely crucial stabilizing role during this intense crisis. He was the anchor the government desperately needed. Navigating the country through that mutiny, that represented the absolute peak of his political influence. After 1964, his reputation as a capable, strong leader was set in stone. But, you know how it goes, the peak is often right before the drop. Section 1. The Ideological Rift. So the main catalyst for this massive rift was the Arusha Declaration of 1967. This was a fundamental policy shift for Tanzania. The declaration officially moved the country toward a one-party political system and fully embraced socialist economic models. This wasn't just some slight adjustment in how things were run. It was a total, ground-up reimagining of how the state and the economy would function. And it was exactly here, right on these issues, that Nyerere and Kambona realized they could no longer walk the same path.
The divergence between the two leaders was incredibly stark. While Nyerere's government pushed hard forward with a one-party system and a really rapid implementation of socialist economics, Kambona fundamentally disagreed. He argued strongly in favor of maintaining political competition, and he urged a lot more caution when it came to making these massive economic changes. Now, looking at this impartially, this wasn't just a petty squabble. This was a profound, deep-seated ideological divide over the very soul of the country's future.
And from that ideological divide, the fall happened incredibly fast. As you'd expect, political disagreements intensified, poisoning the atmosphere with all sorts of rumors about plots and rival factions. Sensing his dramatically declining influence by 1967, Kambona officially resigned from all his government and party positions, publicly citing health reasons. But just weeks later, he and his family secretly fled Tanzania.
He fled all the way to the United Kingdom, and he wouldn't just be there for a little while. He would spend the staggering 25 years there. Really think about that number for a second. 2.5 decades. The man who had organized the independence movement, who had held the absolute highest cabinet positions, was now living thousands of miles away, entirely removed from the nation he helped build. But I should point out, he wasn't silent. From abroad, he became one of the most prominent vocal critics of Tanzania's one-party system, continuously campaigning for democratic reforms straight from his exile in London.
Now, while he was campaigning from the UK, opinions back home became deeply, deeply polarized. To some citizens, Kambona was this courageous defender of democracy, someone who actually sacrificed his own power to stand by his principles. But to others, he was seen as an ambitious politician who was dangerously challenging national unity during a really critical, fragile period of Tanzania's early development. It's a fascinating historical debate, and honestly, it's one that remains pretty unresolved today.
Finally, the world shifted again. In the early 1990s, Tanzania actually introduced multi-party politics, which, if you remember, is the very thing Kambona had been advocating for decades earlier. With the political system finally opened up, the door was unlatched for his return. So, in 1992, after 25 years in exile, Oscar Kambona stepped foot back on Tanzanian soil. As you can imagine, it was a highly anticipated and incredibly emotional return.
The reality of his return, though, it was pretty bittersweet. Large crowds actually gathered to welcome him back, and it was clear that many ordinary Tanzanians still fondly remembered him as that vibrant hero of the independence era. But the hard truth was that the political landscape had permanently changed during his 25-year absence. The country had simply moved on. So while he did remain active in politics, he never came close to regaining that monumental influence he held back in the 1960s. 5 years later, on June 3, 1997, Oscar Kambona passed away in London at the age of 68.
When we zoom out and look at his life as a whole, we see a remarkably complex legacy, right? He was a passionate freedom fighter, he was a foundational nation builder, he was a powerful cabinet minister, and ultimately, he was an isolated exile. His life wasn't just a personal political career, it directly mirrored the profound hopes, the intense growing pains, and the deep, deep ideological struggles of a young African nation that was desperately trying to find its own path on the global stage.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to weigh for yourself based on the historical record we've covered today. Was Oscar Kambona a visionary democratic reformer who was simply ahead of his time? Or was he an ambitious politician who got caught on the losing side of a massive struggle for power? The legacy of Tanzania's forgotten giant is still very much up for debate. Thanks so much for learning with me today. I'll see you next time.